Welcome to Preparing for the ACT 2021-2022, reading passage number 3. If you know which question you want to go over, go ahead and jump straight to that. So looking at this reading passage, this is an informational passage, and key thing is that we're talking about photography and how it changes how cultural groups are represented and perceived. And so it's very important to make sure you read the title, because oftentimes when you want to look at a passage, the title will tell you something about it, especially the informational passages. The fiction ones, the literary ones, those are a little harder to deduce, but definitely when you get to information, it really helps to frame what it is you're talking about. So looking over here on the right at question 21, it says, which of the following rhetorical techniques does the author repeatedly use in the passage as a way to engage the reader? Now what I've done is I've underlined sort of the noun in each option, because oftentimes the noun is one way to help narrow down your options. So letter A is a forthright attack, letter B is an open-ended question, letter C is a direct quotation, and letter D is a description. Now, the key question that some people may be asking is, well, what is a rhetorical technique? And so here, what I've done is I've highlighted some of the rhetorical techniques that were happening, because rhetoric is just a form of argumentation, of presenting an idea. And so here, what we've got is we've got these questions. Why then was this photo taken? What meaning did it convey? What must have it been in his mind? What photo does it mean today? Now it's asking these questions, but it's actually not answering them. And the reason for that is that it wants us to ponder them, not necessarily to come up with a factual answer, but rather just to think about and to plant these questions in our mind that were in the author's mind. And so that's why the answer is letter B, because in some cases, an author will pose a question and then immediately answer them. Here, this isn't happening. Here, the author is sort of rapid fire, throwing several questions at you, and then moving on. So the intent was never to answer the question, but rather the intent was to appeal directly to the reader. So that's the other part of the answer. 22. So it can be most reasonably be inferred that the author's statements about educational use of photographs applies to photographs taken during what time period? Now notice that I highlight the use of educational use. The word photographs shows up quite a lot here. But in these reading passages, oftentimes an adjective or a certain phrase only shows up once. And if you can lock onto that phrase and find it, you're probably going to find the answer a lot quicker. Now, they don't say educational use. It says educational potential. So perhaps it's not the phrase educational use, but rather just educational. But it says the educational potential of photographs is enormous. Okay, well, that doesn't really help talk about any of these answers here. But it says, however, photographs are not objective. They can easily tell lies, as many as lies tell truth. Okay. Now, it doesn't seem to be answering much about, it says during what time period. Okay. Now it says, now anything here, it doesn't mention anything about the time period that was taken, because the photographs taken of Goloth Lay, they were taken at a specific time period. But what they're saying is that photographs in general, and so when we're talking about photographs in general, that means we're talking about any time period since photographs were first taken. Because this last paragraph is sort of generalizing, talking about how photographs can tell the truth as well as they can tell lies. So that's why the answer here is letter F. Number 23. Which of the following words is most nearly given a negative connotation? So here in red, we've highlighted them. So it says, using photographs as educational resources presents particular challenges and must be done with care. So one way you can do this is, if you have time, reread the sentence without this word. Using photographs as resources presents particular challenges and must be done with care. Okay? Using photographs as educational resources presents particular challenges and must be done with care. The word educational really doesn't seem to make this seem negative. So it doesn't seem like educational works. Next one. Here I'm going to reread it by taking out the word old. As Indian people struggled to adapt to catastrophic changes to their ways of living, photographs took thousands of studio portraits and made what they believed to be neutral ethnographic images of the vanishing Indian. So as Indian people struggled to adapt to catastrophic changes to their old ways of living. It doesn't seem, it might, but it doesn't seem like old is necessarily a bad connotation. Next one. But if used carelessly, they can also fuel stereotypical perceptions of American Indians. Now, the word romanticized is here, and I took it out, but notice what word is sitting right next to it. The word is stereotyped, stereotypical. And usually that word is not given, that word is rarely have a positive connotation. So I'm going to stick with that one. That one may be it. So the last one, he and other Chiricahua Apaches fought a protracted war from 63 to 86 against the United States for the right to live in their homelands rather than on reservations. Live on their traditional homelands rather than on reservations. It doesn't seem like traditional is that. So it seems like letter C is the best choice. The reason is even if we took out the word romanticized, the word stereotypical is still there. And stereotypical is usually a negative connotation. 24. Which of the following actions referred to a passage in the passage most clearly characterizes a hypothetical event rather than an actual event? Okay. So here we got lines 17 and 18. It says, Indian delegations that traveled to Washington to defend tribal treaty rights were photographed in studios and in front of federal buildings. Now, important that these two phrases are right next to each other and in the same sentence. They traveled to Washington, D.C. to defend tribal treaty rights. Well, it's almost impossible that one of these can be true, but the other one can be a hypothetical. So right off the bat, we can pretty much eliminate those two. So now it's down to these two. Ironically, the Apaches had long farmed as part of the traditional life they fought so tenaciously to protect. Well, it's unlikely that they would fight to protect a hypothetical event. So let's look at line 83. In addition to conducting background research, try putting yourself in these photos. Stand next to Goyathale, his peers, his wife, their children. We can't stand next to him because he's passed on. So that's why letter J is the answer. 25. Particular photographs of Goyathale are referred to. Now I've underlined them in purple because they are three particular ones that happen. First one down here, starting at line 46. One photo shows him and three other Chiricahuas in their camp just prior to surrendering. Then another one at the top here, and another well-known studio portrait in 1890, he poses with a rifle. And then a few years later, he was photographed again, this time holding a more pastoral pose in place, holding a melon in the garden with his wife and three of their children. So, these particular photographs are referred to and described by the author to support his claim. Well, it doesn't talk about the merits of photography. at least in terms of depending on who took it, because they don't mention who the photographers were. Anyone can control his or her public image by becoming more involved. Well, Goliath Lay couldn't control his. And it doesn't talk much about the dating of it. It only mentions the date in this middle one. It doesn't mention the date in the first or the third. Sorry, it mentions the date here for this first one, but it doesn't mention the date for this last one in particular. And so the general spirit of talking about these is talking about having an accurate understanding in knowing the circumstances and knowing why they were doing what they were doing. So the best answer here is letter A, especially considering the rhetorical techniques we talked about in question 21, where it asks, why was this photo taken? What meaning did it convey? What was the meaning behind the photo? 26. The author most strongly suggests that one reason commercial photographers began to photograph Native Americans was that commercial photographers were, now here I underlined the key verb, that photographers were instructed, that they were devoted, committed, or influenced. Now, one thing you want to be aware of is oftentimes with these reading passages, two of them can be kind of close together. And if you noticed, devoted and committed are kind of related. Now, they have different words. They have stuff that comes after that, of course. But when you see that, when you see two options that are kind of close together like that, that may be a sign that those may not be the correct answer. So, commercial photographers. I underlined that phrase in the question because that also is a phrase that only shows up in one particular place in the passage. And so if we can find that one place, we can jump right to it and say, all right, so what is this saying? Well, photographers also accompanied government expeditions where they documented traditional cultures, leading the way for tourists and commercial photographers who followed, carried their cameras and their preconceptions into Native American communities. All right. So the key thing here to note is that they accompanied government expeditions. And that's one thing that's mentioned in letter J. Because if we look at letter F, doesn't say they were instructed. Letter G, it doesn't say they were caring about educational resources. And letter H, it doesn't say they wanted to get over their preconceived ideas. Rather, they just joined. And very often in the reading section, they'll change one word, and they'll use a cognate or something or a synonym instead of the identical word. But it says government expeditions to the west. So instead of accompanied, they use the word joined. 27. In the passage, the author notes that a strange aspect of the photo of Goliath Lay with a rifle. Now that's a key word because that word only shows up once right up here in line 52. And that photo was taken and says this photo personifies the renegade image, but strangely it was taken about 2 to 4 years after Goliath Lay surrendered while he was a prisoner of war. So the word rifle allows us to zero in on this paragraph, but you can't just read the one sentence that it's in, you have to read around it. And so the key thing right here is that it says he was a prisoner of war. So that's why letter B is the answer. Number 28. The author directly refers to which of the following aspects of a photograph of Goliath Lay as being ironic. So again, ironic is the key word, and I've highlighted this here. That word shows up in line 72. It says, ironically, the Apaches had long farmed as part of the traditional life they fought so tenaciously to protect. Okay. So, the answer deals with the idea of farming. And so here it says they had long practiced farming. But the photo seemed to suggest that Goyathli had learned farming from others. And that's because in this highlighted portion it says, did the people see it as a simple family, or did it personify the government's policy towards Indians, subduing feared and hated warriors, re-educating them and teaching them to farm? So that is what that passage is dealing with. 29. The author indicates that for the sake of an unbiased interpretation compared to reading written documents with care, reading photographs with care is... Now I highlighted written documents because that, again, is that key phrase. So you want to be looking for those key phrases because if you can find them, oftentimes the answer is going to be around there. So here in the passage, in line 76, it says, as much as any written document, they have to be read with care in order to be understood accurately. So they is referring to photographs. So when it says they, we're talking about photographs. So they, photographs, have to be read with as much care. So that's why it says just as important. And then finally, it says in line 86. So here they actually tell you where the word is. The word framed is used figuratively. So not literally framed, but it's used figuratively. It says, framed with factual information and viewed empathetically, each photograph can reach its richest potential as a significant educational opportunity and resource. So it's used figuratively. So we're not actually putting factual information around the image as a frame. Rather, we're using it as a way to give support to how we view a photograph. So it's not a way of preserving a photograph, and we're not literally surrounding it, because that would mean that we're using it literally, but it says we're using this word figuratively. Okay. And we're not talking about pictures of Goyathli in particular. We're talking about historical photographs in general. So that's why the answer is letter F. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to check all the other videos that we have in the playlist.